A millionaire discovers hidden resilience after a toilet paper emergency. Tim Sullivan stared at the frantic shoppers clawing at shelves, empty carts echoing despair. Panic gripped his heart as he caught sight of a news headline flashing across his phone. The words, "toilet paper shortage," felt as heavy as lead pressing down on his chest. As the owner of Ohio's most successful sanitation company, he never anticipated that something so trivial could spiral into a national crisis. But here he was, surrounded by chaos, feeling the gusts of uncertainty sweep away his confidence. At 45, Tim was a self-made millionaire, yet beneath lavish comforts lay an unsettling loneliness. His mansion felt like a fortress built of regret, especially when his children, Emma and Jake, rolled their eyes at him. How had he become a stranger in their home, a mere provider instead of a dad? The laughter they once shared felt like echoes of a past long gone, lost in spreadsheets and missed family dinners. Each day brought waves of doubt, the gnawing sense that he was failing them, failing himself. Then came the frenzy at the supermarket, a desperate dash to hoard rolls of toilet paper. Tim's instincts kicked in to protect his empire, but as he thrust the packages into his cart, an observer recorded him live. His heart sank as he saw notifications flood in. The world turned on him, mocking, shaming. He was a millionaire caught in a moment of greed, stripped of dignity. Fury flaring through his veins. Friends questioned him, strangers condemned him. Tim felt his worth unraveling in real time as he read the angry messages branded with sellout and hypocrite. Doubt gnawed at him. Was this the legacy he wanted to leave? Hadn't he built a business rooted in serving the community? As chaos reigned around him, a profound internal conflict took over. He was caught between the allure of profit and the deep-seated necessity to nurture the relationships he had nearly lost. Panic and regret surged within him, like a tidal wave approaching the shore. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can, leave a like. It really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue. With clenched fists, Tim realized he needed perspective. Desperate for guidance, he reached out to his estranged father, Frank, a retired plumber who had once taught him the value of hard work. The thought of facing him filled Tim with dread. Would Frank judge him? Or worse, would he see him as a failure? Yet at the same time, he craved the solace that came from the only man who had ever instilled a sense of purpose in him. The old advice he had once disregarded now echoed in his mind, a lifeline amidst the storm. They met at their childhood home, and Frank's weary face revealed both disappointment and understanding. As they sat across from each other at the weathered oak dining table, Frank's voice carried a weight Tim had long ignored. Memories flashed before him, the shared struggles, the moments of camaraderie. He recalled how his father rallied the neighborhood to support each other when money was low. The pain in his chest intensified. He hadn't just let himself down, he had failed the values that mattered most. As Tim absorbed his father's stories, he felt an awakening, a burning desire to reclaim his identity and the values he had cast aside. But just as inspiration surged, he was thrust into a perilous choice. Should he prioritize profit or put the community first? The tension in his mind twisted tighter than ever. A plan began to form, helping others, distributing essentials to those in need. Yet as his resolve solidified, another shadow loomed tall. Competing companies saw his charitable initiative as a threat. The idea of combating those who once respected him filled Tim with dread. Staring at his father's earnest face, Tim felt the suffocating weight of impending loss. Would he walk away from everything again? Choices loomed, each more crushing than the last, time ticking down as he stood on the precipice of redefining not just his business, but his existence. Would he find the courage to embrace risk for the sake of integrity? Tim sat in his father's small, dimly lit kitchen, the sound of silence stretching between them, a tangible reminder of lost years and deep-seated wounds. The oak table, worn and scarred, bore witness to the many discussions they had once shared, talks that used to nurture their bond, laden now with the weight of regret and unsaid words. Tim's heartbeat raced as his thoughts spiraled. There was a realization blossoming, but it was shrouded in uncertainty. He breathed deeply, bracing himself for the commitment he was about to make. "Dad," he finally murmured, breaking the silence that hung like a cloud. "I want to do something meaningful. This whole toilet paper debacle has made me realize I've been focusing on the wrong things." Frank's eyes softened, and Tim observed a fleeting moment of hope flickering within them. He pressed on. "I want to help people who need basic supplies, but I'm terrified of the backlash. What if my competitors sabotage what I'm trying to do?" "Son, fear is a natural response," Frank replied, his voice steady. "But it can also be a catalyst for growth. You can either let it consume you or let it drive you to something better. What matters is not how much you have, but how much you're willing to share." In that moment, Tim felt a surge of clarity. It was more than just a business initiative. It was an opportunity to reshape his identity. No longer just a businessman, he could be a leader, embodying the principles that had guided him in his youth. He calculated the risk, recognizing the possible failure he faced, and the thought ignited a fire within him. The urgency was palpable. Tim left his childhood home, the chilly air biting against his skin but invigorating his spirit. He envisioned a campaign centered around generosity, an initiative where he distributed essential supplies not just to those in need, but to neighborhoods forgotten by larger corporations. The logistical hurdles seemed insurmountable, but the very notion of rekindling that lost connection with his community rendered the challenge exhilarating. He arrived at his office, a stark contrast to the modest home he'd just left. His staff hustled about, oblivious to the internal revolution surging within him. Tim called a meeting, his voice steady, tinged with newfound purpose. "Folks, we need to shift our strategy," he began, eyes sweeping across the room, catching the flicker of confusion amongst his staff. "Instead of maximizing profits during this crisis, we're going to focus on what we can provide for our community." The murmurs of dissent spiraled around the room. "We'll lose money, Tim. Our clients will pull out," one of the executives reminded him, skepticism clear in her tone. But Tim held his ground, his voice unwavering. "I know the risks, but we can create a ripple effect. We can be the company that cares. If we help them now, they will remember us when this is over." The chatter dwindled as the silence enveloped them again, but he felt a collective tension rise. The weight of apprehension contrasted with a glimmer of possibility. By the time the meeting concluded, Tim was exhausted, yet electrified. Decision days like these were rare. Today he had chosen purpose over profit. Yet lurking in the back of his mind was the gnawing concern of reprisal from his competitors, all those who thrived on chaos and profit margins. He knew they wouldn't take kindly to a company that threatened their grasp on a population parched for basic necessities. As he left the office, he also crossed a threshold within himself. Would he embrace this risk wholeheartedly? Would he fight for what truly mattered? Each step felt heavier than the one before, weighted with doubt yet accelerated by determination. But the moment of clarity faded as the churning fear began to resurface. The time had come to face the doubters and the consequences of his newfound mission. Would the community rally behind him or turn their backs in the harsh reality of competition? He stopped short, frozen between his idealism and the fierce winds of reality blowing against him. Consciousness dawning. Facing the competition would require not only courage, but the revelation of the true depths of his resilience. In this intricate game of integrity versus survival, what would he choose? The sun dipped below the horizon as Tim paced the periphery of his office. A whirlwind of apprehension and possibility. The faces of his staff, tinged with disbelief, echoed in his thoughts. Primal instincts whispered that they were right. Profit was safety. Yet another voice, quieter but more persistent, reminded him of his father's words. He was at a crossroads, and facing it required more than just courage. It demanded clarity of purpose, unwavering commitment to his newfound mission. He had spent years mastering the art of business, sinking into the world of numbers and profit margins. Yet the essence of his ambition had been obscured by the grind. Now, the thought of risking everything for something greater felt daunting yet exhilarating. What if he truly could make a difference? Tim found himself drawn to the core idea of connection, a longing to knit together resources and human experience. He envisioned logistics not as an obstacle, but as a bridge to those left behind in the race for profit. It was about something far more profound than making money. It was about reinstating dignity to those who felt invisible. As he sat at his desk, he began mapping out actionable steps. He could harness his company's network to gather supplies, not just toilet paper, but food, hygiene products, anything that could uplift marginalized neighborhoods. The sight of blank sheets rapidly filling with words and plans ignited a spark within him. This was his opportunity to dust off the ideals he had abandoned in the pursuit of success. But alongside this burgeoning hope, doubt slithered back into view. What if the backlash was swift and vicious? Competitors would perceive this as a threat to their bottom lines, and Tim could almost envision the smear campaigns unfolding, aiming to erode his credibility. The thought of being undermined by former peers was a bitter pill to swallow. In the quiet of his office, he wrestled with the fear of isolation. A voice whispered that he might fail, not just as a businessman, but also personally. Tim paused, gripping the edge of his desk, memories flooding back. He recalled times when he had faced obstacles that felt insurmountable. The vision of himself as a scrappy entrepreneur resurfaced, fueled by a fierce determination. He had never backed down from a challenge before, even when the odds were decidedly against him. "Why now?" he whispered into the empty room, the question hanging heavily in the air. The intimidation of competition felt insidious. It attempted to detour him from the path he was carving. Yet the warmth of purpose glowed steadily, suggesting a transformative truth. Sometimes, in the face of impending danger, one discovers strengths they never knew they possessed. Tim sensed a shift. The very fear that threatened to paralyze him was, in truth, a doorway to resilience. Instead of retreating under pressure, he could use it as a catalyst for something meaningful. Perhaps embracing this risk was not merely an act of defiance against competitors, but a declaration of his true self. Resolute, he stood and glanced around the room, eyes landing on a photo of his small team from the previous year's holiday party. They were smiling, looking uplifted by shared moments rather than financial gains. "This is about them, about us," he murmured, reconnecting with the genuine essence of leadership. "If I want to inspire, I must stand strong." A renewed sense of purpose sliced through his second-guessing. The plan crystallization began. As he prepared to share this vision with his team again, he acknowledged the unyielding tension that pushed against his resolve. The impending meeting loomed as an intricate challenge, not simply of logistics, but of leadership. Would they see his dream as theirs, or would skepticism continue to shroud possibility? With a deep breath, he realized this moment extended beyond fear and doubt. It was, indeed, a showdown between the man he once was and the leader he aspired to be. Tim stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next in his journey, the heart of resilience meeting the storm head-on, eager yet uncertain. What awaited him in the meeting room? Would his vision instill belief or ignite further dissent? Tim's heart raced as he approached the door to the conference room. He could hear the low murmur of his team's voices drifting in, fueled by a mix of uncertainty and curiosity. Would they accept his vision, or would their doubts drown out his ambitions? He felt the familiar squeeze of anxiety grip him, yet the thought of their faces, lit with hope, propelled him forward. As he entered, the mood shifted. The chatter stopped, and all eyes turned towards him, expectant and searching. The long table stretched before him, laden with proposals and spreadsheets, symbols of the staunch business mindset he had once championed. But today, none of that mattered. Today, he intended to break free from the confines of profit-driven thinking. "Thank you for being here," he began, his voice more resolute than he felt. "I know many of you are uncertain about the direction I want to take us, but I need you to hear me out." He paused, taking in their expressions. He was met with a blend of skepticism and intrigue. His team, a carefully assembled mix of loyalists and rivals, had tasted the corporate world's edge, and he sensed the unease brewing in the room. "I've spent years chasing the numbers," he continued, leaning against the conference table, his hands planted firmly to steady himself. "And while success can be measured in profit margins, I've realized it's also rooted in our ability to make a meaningful impact on the lives around us." A few furrowed brows indicated caution, but he pressed on. "Imagine leveraging our resources to reach those in need. What if, instead of merely surviving, we became a source of hope? We have the power to provide for those who feel invisible, not just as a business, but as leaders." The silence thickened, a palpable tension hanging in the air. He recalled the harsh sounds of judgment once wielded against him. Voices from within and beyond his company. They echoed now, trying to deter him from this resolute pivot. "We can gather essentials for families, food, hygiene products, clothing, and distribute them where they are most needed," he stated, his voice gaining vigor. "It might seem risky, but embracing that risk could change us all. This is about reinvigorating our mission and redefining success." A murmuring erupted. The hesitation was now on full display. He could see Linda, his steadfast marketing director, leaning forward, weighing his words. Tim's mind raced, knowing he needed to connect with them even deeper. "This isn't just about charity, it's about engagement," he urged, searching for the right words. "As an organization, we can improve our community and find new purpose in our work." One voice broke through. Jim, the finance officer, with his tendency to challenge any suggestion that seemed to jeopardize profitability. "And what do you propose we do when the competitors come for us? You think they'll take kindly to our shift?" The moment felt charged, brazen skepticism testing his resolve. Tim faced Jim directly, letting the challenge settle. "Jim, we've become trapped by fear, afraid of losing what we've built instead of envisioning what we could become. Just think about the impact we'll have and the loyalty we'll garner by doing something vast and necessary. People want to believe in a company willing to stand for something." Tim locked eyes with his team, holding their collective gaze, as he took a deep breath, grounding himself with purpose. The path ahead felt clearer, yet the stakes were monumental. Would they share his vision or remain anchored in their skepticism? Before he could process their reactions, Linda spoke up, a cautious supporter, intermingling uncertainty with curiosity. "What do you need from us to get started?" A flicker of hope ignited within him, a newfound alignment emerging at that key moment. "We need brainstorming. We need to define roles. We need our voices and skills combined to create a plan." Tim began to lay out the next steps, integrating contributions that leaned on their diverse talents. In the midst of his description, a realization seeped into his consciousness. They were showing willingness, however tentative, to explore the uncharted territory before them. Yet deep down, he knew the challenges weren't behind them. They were just beginning. The potential for dissent still loomed, and any naysayers might stand firm. With every idea exchanged around the table, the truth resided. This wasn't simply about executing a strategy, but fostering a culture of resilience and adaptability. As the meeting progressed into brainstorming sessions, he felt a shiver of excitement coursing through him. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could instigate a shift that transcends mere numbers. But even as conversations flowed, the quiet ache of doubt remained. What would happen if they faced real backlash? Would they truly stand together amidst the storm that threatened? And as the meeting wrapped up, one question lingered in his mind, precariously perched at the edge of resolution. How far would he go to lead his team, a group that had tasted the well-established system, towards a path they had never dared to envision before? Tim's thoughts swirled as he stepped out of the conference room, the weight of his aspirations pressing heavily upon him. His team had offered tentative support, a flicker of hope amidst the skepticism, yet he felt the enormity of the challenge ahead. How would he transform their cautious enthusiasm into steadfast commitment? The quiet hum of apprehension settled in the pit of his stomach, gnawing at him as he walked through the stark hallways that had once felt like home. He leaned against the cool wall, replaying their faces. Each line of concern etched deep in their brows revealed a mix of fear and longing for change. They were craving something beyond profits, yet their trust was fragile. Tim needed to harness that energy, but how? The answer would not come easily. Trust had to be earned, not just spoken. As he settled into his office, the early evening sun streamed through the window, casting warm rays across his desk piled high with reports and plans. He could almost feel hope illuminating his thoughts. Strategy began to unfold in his mind. What if he organized sessions that not only focused on logistics, but also invited his team to share their personal experiences and aspirations? Tim wanted them to see the connection between their work and the impact they could champion. He envisioned interactive workshops that could nudge them beyond basic tasks, fostering a sense of ownership that went hand in hand with his vision. Perhaps, if they could form deeper connections with one another, the collective motivation to venture into the unknown could flourish. However, beneath that excitement lurked a gnawing doubt. What if his ideas didn't resonate? Tim's mind drifted back to the critical voices that had punctured his confidence in the past. Moments spent silenced by uncertainty overshadowed the emerging clarity he wanted to build. He could feel himself hesitating, the fear of failure creeping back, yet he knew that staying in that comfort zone would lead him nowhere different. Drawing a deep breath, Tim began to draft an email to his team, proposing the first workshop. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, uncertainty gnawing as he contemplated the likelihood of resistance. What if they pushed back? What if they refused to engage? He chuckled bitterly. He would need to be ready to confront their questions head-on, or risk stalling progress before it began. The next morning, the atmosphere in the office buzzed with an unfamiliar energy. Tim welcomed everyone with a smile that felt genuine for the first time in weeks. "Today marks a pivotal moment for us," he announced, feeling the weight of their scrutiny. "We're going to explore not just our business objectives, but the passions that drive us as individuals." As he floated various ideas for the workshop, he noticed Linda nodding enthusiastically, her initial caution appearing to dissipate. But he also saw Jim's skeptical demeanor, brow furrowed deeper. The same voice that sought to challenge him before now felt like an obstacle he needed to strategically navigate. "Tim, these sessions sound interesting, but do you truly think people will want to share their personal motivations?" Jim posed, his voice laced with skepticism. "What if they don't see the value?" Tim felt the familiar flutter of anxiety, but beneath it, a surge of resolve rose. "I believe that sharing our motivations will create stronger bonds and a deeper connection to our mission," he replied, raising his chin slightly to meet Jim's challenging gaze. "Success isn't just about profits, it's how we resonate with our work and each other." His response sparked an unexpected wave of conversation. Ideas were shared, challenges addressed, and slowly but surely, the initial walls began to crumble. He found himself buoyed by the positivity. Perhaps they were beginning to see a glimmer of potential in his vision. Yet, amidst the vibrant discussion, a nagging tension lingered. Would this camaraderie persevere once confronted with obstacles beyond his control? Doubt clung to the edges of his burgeoning optimism. The possibility of resistance loomed larger than any promise of impact. Tim gathered his notes that evening, preparing for the workshop ahead, uncertainty coursing through him. He felt both terrified and exhilarated, aware that every step further into this uncharted territory would demand unwavering courage. The time had come to face his fears, not just for himself, but to nurture a team learning to navigate their identities in an evolving landscape. As he reflected on this pivotal day, one pressing question lingered in his thoughts. How could he inspire them to recognize their own resilience and transform it into collective strength? The next step beckoned, and Tim wasn't sure if he was ready to lead them into the depths of vulnerability, or if it would expose further fractures in their resolve. But he knew he had to try. Tim paced the floor of his office, his mind racing. The workshop loomed ahead, an opportunity teetering on the edge of disaster or triumph. He had visualized great success, yet every step he took further solidified a gnawing uncertainty within. What if it all fell apart? The stakes felt heavy, a fathomless void of potential failure. Yet he also sensed it pushed him into a critical crossroad. Determined to innovate, Tim began constructing an agenda that fused strategy and personal storytelling. He jotted down topics that would encourage emotional engagement. They would not only assess professional goals, but embark on a journey unearthing their why, the motivations behind their daily toil. The thought brought a flicker of hope, igniting a fervor within him. As the hours passed, he noticed the time slipping away, urgency slicing through his thoughts. Should he share his own vulnerabilities? Would that encourage others? He remembered his earlier attempts to forge connections, teetering between sharing too little and revealing too much. Was transparency a strength or a liability? The duality of his role weighed heavily on him. Tim steeled himself with a deep breath. He was not just a leader, but also a human being who struggled with uncertainty like everyone else. As he settled into the chair before his laptop, his fingers danced across the keys, drafting initial guiding questions for the session. What experience shaped your career choices? How do your passions align with our objectives? Each question designed to peel back layers. It called for reviewing not only their work ethic, but their entire purpose. Yet the voice of skepticism, buried in his consciousness, whispered doubts, causing him to flinch. Would his team perceive him as weak if he revealed too much? The dichotomy within him stirred unease. Morning arrived, sunlight cascading into the boardroom. Faces filled the seats, each marked by curiosity and trepidation. He felt a visceral twinge, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Yet it was also layered with the thrill of possibility. As the initial discussions unfolded, the conversation shifted fluidly. Linda took the lead, sharing her struggles in balancing creativity against rigid company demands. It was raw but real. To Tim's surprise, Jim's expression softened. Was this the opening he needed? Perhaps this vulnerability could be a conduit for real change. As each member shared, the barriers once dividing them appeared to dissolve. What had begun as a mere workshop transformed into a sanctuary of understanding. Ideas flowed like tributaries converging into a river, yielding an undercurrent of strength. However, just as he forged this bond, the specter of conflict returned, embodied in the harsh words of an unseen challenge. As the workshop progressed, Jim's skepticism re-emerged, wrapping around the room like a dense fog. "Tim, we're here to work, not touch on feelings and aspirations. What do these discussions even yield?" he challenged. There was tension in Jim's voice, the depth of a collective breath held in anticipation. Tim felt his heart race. This was the pivotal moment. Would he fall into defensive tactics or embrace his newfound resolve? He inhaled slowly, centering himself amidst the tempest of uncertainty. "I believe these dialogues matter because they reveal the heart of what drives us," he replied, voice steady yet infused with vulnerability. "Understanding ourselves can amplify not just our work ethic, but how we connect as a team. What we build here requires both skill and soul." His words hung in the air, challenging Jim's perspective while forging solidarity among the group. Tim's stomach flipped, anxiety warring with excitement. Would this potently vulnerable approach fortify the bonds they collectively created, or would it splinter under the pressure of opposing views? As the dialogue soared higher, Tim's awareness sharpened. He could sense the lurking challenges ahead, a shadow of doubt still hovering where faith had grown. The next step required further courage, yet the beacon of possibility flickered brighter. The hour passed, but a pressing question took hold in his mind. How could he keep this momentum alive when conflicts inevitably arose? Tim turned to view his colleagues, the weight of his uncertainty looming as they shared glances of affirmation. The horizon of change blurred ahead, and the courage to confront the unknown had never felt so necessary. The moment begged another question. Was it within him to embrace the power of collective vulnerability again? Eyes reflecting a mix of hope and apprehension, Tim steeled himself for the next inevitable confrontation. As the workshop drew to a close, he recognized the urgency of choice. The time had come to define what true resilience looks like. Tim sat at his desk, staring blankly at his laptop screen, the echoes of the workshop still reverberating through his mind. He had managed to navigate the precarious balance between vulnerability and authority, yet the looming specter of Jim's skepticism continued to haunt him. How could he truly sustain this depth of connection when faced with resistance? The day wore on, but Tim was restless. Every tick of the clock reminded him that the transformation they had begun was fragile, threatened by dissonance and disagreement. He mulled over Jim's question, his earlier confidence now shrouded in doubt. Was it foolish to believe that acknowledging emotions could lead to heightened performance? As he reflected, he recalled a lesson from his early career days. A mentor once told him, "To lead well, you first have to lead yourself." What did leading himself look like now? Yes, he had shared his vulnerabilities in that workshop, but was he willing to explore his deeper motivations further? Tim initiated a self-assessment, one he avoided until now. What truly fueled his ambitions? Was it recognition, the pursuit of excellence, a desire to make a lasting impact, or simply the fear of failure? That evening, Tim took a long walk. The city buzzed around him, yet he felt an eerie calm, as if he stood apart from the chaos. He contemplated how much he had placed his self-worth on external validation. His climb up the corporate ladder had always resulted in applause and accolades, yet he began to realize that true fulfillment had always eluded him. Fear of inadequacy had propelled him forward, but it also anchored him to his doubts. He stopped by a small cafe, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee grounding him. Sitting at a corner table, he took out a notebook and began to write. This act of introspection felt liberating, each stroke of the pen igniting a deeper awareness within. He penned down his fears and aspirations, creating 2 columns. Under fears, he wrote, "Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of irrelevance." Under aspirations, he wrote, "To inspire others, to foster innovation, to build genuine connections." As he reviewed his list, a question pierced through. What if embracing failure was part of the journey towards resilience? The mere acknowledgement of this possibility felt strangely empowering. Tim scribbled down a new guiding question. What if failure is a stepping stone, not a stumbling block? Over the next few days, he immersed himself in further understanding resilience. He read articles, listened to podcasts on emotional intelligence, and conversed with colleagues who shared their stories. Each insight reinforced his initial feeling that connection was rooted in shared experiences of vulnerability, yet he still felt a crucial piece was missing. Conversations with others sparked an idea.
He would initiate a series of small gatherings outside of formal meetings. This informal setup would allow people to engage freely, to share without the weight of structured agendas. Each meeting would center on personal growth, sharing failures, triumphs, and aspirations in a safe haven that felt less institutional. However, Tim couldn't ignore the reality that not everyone might welcome this shift. Jim still loomed large in his mind, the naysayer who had nearly derailed their progress. Tim acknowledged the necessity of addressing Jim's concerns directly. After all, he was a key player in the team. Could he foster this new approach despite potential conflict? The idea of confrontation sent a chill down his spine. Yet, what if this very conflict became a catalyst for further growth? As Tim prepared for the meetings, he felt a flicker of hope growing within him. His resolve to lead authentically sparked a determination stronger than before. The upcoming discussions with Jim felt unavoidable, but they also appeared essential. The moment of truth loomed ahead, a pivotal conversation that could either strengthen their team or fracture it entirely. He breathed deeply, bracing himself for the inevitable confrontation. Was he prepared to face Jim anew, armed with the confidence of shared vulnerabilities? The question lingered in the air, tinged with both promise and anxiety. It was time to chart the course ahead, using the lessons of self-discovery to navigate the complexities of leadership. With conviction igniting in his heart, Tim realized that the challenge could lead to a new chapter in their collaboration, a moment of potential transformation that neither he nor Jim could ignore. But what if this very confrontation revealed more about Jim's resistance than he anticipated? Tim spent the night replaying scenarios in his mind. Each time he envisioned his upcoming conversation with Jim, his heart raced and his palms grew sweaty. How would Jim react? Would he see the value in Tim's initiative, or would he dismiss it outright? The stakes felt monumental, escalating far beyond just a simple meeting. It was about transformation, his own and the team's. The next morning, Tim arrived early at the office. He needed the quiet to center himself before the inevitable tension of the day unraveled. As he brewed his coffee, the aroma filled him with a mix of comfort and urgency. This wasn't just any day. It felt like the dawn of a new journey. Yet an oppressive weight settled in his stomach. He sat at his desk, meticulously preparing his talking points. He wanted to ensure that he conveyed his vision clearly, emphasizing the value of vulnerability, collaboration, and innovation. The aim of the meeting had shifted, though. This was now about seeking not only Jim's support, but also his.
Would Jim be able to recognize the benefit of a more human-centric approach to leadership? As the clock ticked closer to the hour, Tim felt his resolve waver. Self-doubt crept back in as memories of Jim's critical remarks fueled his anxiety. Was it too late to back out? What if his idea fell flat? Perhaps those doubts were just remnants of his old self, a self that had prioritized accolades over authenticity. Minutes before the meeting, he glanced out of his window, the city teeming with energy below. Suddenly, it hit him. If he wanted his colleagues to embrace vulnerability and communicate freely, he needed to model that behavior himself. Tim took a deep breath, letting go of the fear tight in his chest. He reminded himself that everyone, even Jim, was capable of growth. When the time came, he greeted Jim with an open demeanor, inviting him into a space that felt less like an office and more like a conversation between equals. Jim's demeanor was guarded, but Tim pressed on, sharing his reflections on their past workshop and the profound insights it had sparked in him. "Jim, I've been thinking about our team dynamics," Tim began carefully. "What if we created a setting where everyone could share their failures and successes openly? I've seen how transformative vulnerability can be, both personally and professionally." Jim crossed his arms, a gesture Tim interpreted as skepticism. "And what's the point of that? People will just wallow in their disappointments instead of pushing forward." Tim felt a familiar sense of tension in the air, but he shifted his approach. What if we consider failure not as a setback, but as part of our growth? If we don't allow space for authenticity, we're stifling innovation. For a moment, Jim hesitated. Tim seized the opportunity, leaning forward. I'm asking you to be part of this change. I want to hear your thoughts, your experiences. We can lead by example. The room hung in silence, the weight of Jim's expression revealing a battle within. Tim observed as a flicker of uncertainty crossed Jim's face, and he realized there was more at stake than just Tim's presentation. Perhaps Jim felt vulnerable himself, caught between his ingrained skepticism and the evolving landscape of leadership. But just as Tim thought a breakthrough might be possible, Jim retorted, "I still don't buy into this touchy-feeling nonsense. We're here to work, not to sit around sharing our feelings." Disappointment seeped into the corner of Tim's heart, but instead of retreating, he met this challenge head-on. "I understand where you're coming from, Jim. The conventional way hasn't brought us closer. What if we're missing an important aspect of employee engagement? What if our greatest strengths will emerge not from perfection, but from our shared vulnerabilities?" Tim had thrown down a gauntlet, and as he awaited Jim's response, he felt both fear and exhilaration mixing together. It was a moment of potential, perhaps more pivotal than he realized. The path ahead demanded strength, resilience, and unyielding commitment to growth. Would he manage to shift Jim's perception, or was he merely setting himself up for disappointment? The air was thick with tension, and as he watched Jim's expression harden, Tim knew that the outcome of this exchange could either ignite a new movement in their leadership style or reinforce the old guard. He couldn't turn back now. They stood on a precipice of transformation. What lay ahead remained uncertain, but one truth rang clear. The conversation was just beginning, and how it unfolded could alter the trajectory of their team, and possibly even their lives. Tim blinked, the atmosphere heavy with unresolved tension, as Jim squared his shoulders, steeling himself against Tim's proposition. There was no denying that a shift was necessary. Tim could feel it palpably, not just in the office dynamics, but within himself. This was as much about his own evolution as it was about instigating change in the team. "I hear what you're saying, Tim," Jim finally responded, voice clipped yet containing a hint of curiosity. "But you need to realize that people want results, not a therapy session every week." "I'm not suggesting we turn the workplace into a support group," Tim replied, leaning further into the dialogue. "But results thrive when people feel valued and understood. Don't you ever feel it? The weight on your shoulders? If we could talk openly about our struggles, wouldn't that drive us?" Jim's lips tightened as he regarded Tim. Underneath the stoic facade, Tim sensed a flicker, a potential wavering commitment to his rigid belief system. That moment, however short, began to plant a seed of hope in Tim's mind. "What do you need to feel comfortable trying this?" Tim pressed, forcing himself to hold Jim's gaze. It was a strategic maneuver to deflect the conversation away from confrontation and steer it towards partnership. "Look, vulnerability doesn't mean weakness. It's acknowledging our limits and pushing through them with the support of our team." For a moment, silence draped over them. Jim visibly wrestled within, attempting to reconcile years of ingrained work culture with Tim's fresh perspective. Tim seized the opportunity, his heart beating loudly, the rhythm matching the urgency of the moment. "Think about it, Jim. We've been stagnant. Innovation requires risk, and risk requires honesty. If we are not open, how can we hope to challenge each other and ourselves?" Tim's voice carried a weight he hadn't intended, but it resonated with conviction. Jim let out a begrudging sigh. "Fine, I'll concede there could be merit in what you're suggesting," he said cautiously. "But if this flops, it's on you." Tim felt a surge of adrenaline, partly from Jim's reluctant acceptance and partly from the responsibility now resting on his shoulders. "I'll take that risk," he affirmed, feeling more empowered with each word. The small victory sat sweetly on his tongue, but unease lingered. As he wrapped up their discussion, Tim realized that he had ignited a spark, but the path forward, filled with uncertainty, needed careful navigation. This wasn't merely a one-time conversation. It would require ongoing dialogue and tangible follow-through. For a moment, doubt edged its way back into his mind. What if Jim didn't fully support him going forward? What if his attempts at fostering vulnerability eventually backfired? Walking away from the meeting, Tim felt the weight of his own resolve. He had stepped into the arena, having implemented a fundamental shift in how they would approach leadership within the organization. And yet, many questions loomed. How would Jim adapt his leadership style from here on? Would Tim find allies within the team who shared his vision? Or would they retreat into their shells, crushed under the weight of traditionalism? For now, Tim had initiated change. But for every entrance he made, there loomed challenges that could either support or undermine his aspirations. With a burning determination, he resolved to not only advocate for a new approach, but also prepare for opposition where he least expected it. As the day progressed, he sensed an undercurrent of anticipation thrumming through his colleagues. The environment felt charged, and he couldn't quite place the sensation. Was it excitement or trepidation? That uncertainty bristled within him, beckoning him to find clarity amidst chaos. Tim made his way back to his desk, preparing for the inevitable discussions that would ripple from this intersection of ideals. The next steps were crucial, and it rested heavy on his mind that as he ventured into this transformative experience, he needed not only his vision intact, but a robust strategy to navigate the myriad emotions and resistance he might encounter. What would occur when the team met to further discuss the new proposals? Tim's resolve naturally tangled with anxiety. Could he maintain this momentum of change when the pressure mounted? The stakes felt high, and as he considered the potential ramifications of his initiative, a new conundrum dawned. How would he confront the strengths and weaknesses of his colleagues, all while risking his emerging vision? Tim Sullivan stood in front of a crowded auditorium, the energy buzzing like static in the air. Just a few months ago, he had been circling his doubts, still churning from his humiliating toilet paper incident and laden with the weight of expectations. Yet today was different. Today, he was prepared to unveil a new chapter, not just for himself, but for his company and the community it served. "Now, I don't typically take center stage," he began, his voice steady this time. "But I'm no longer focused on being the richest man in the room. I'm committed to being the one who makes a difference." The opening resonated deep within him, a complete reversal from the life he led just months prior. Tim had turned his embarrassment into a catalyst for change, and now he was ready to share that vision with everyone. He recounted his months-long journey of self-discovery, his struggles with vulnerability, and the important conversations he had encouraged among his team. The fear of judgment. "To inspire means to invite others to rise with you. I had to learn that success isn't just in the numbers, but in connection. We'd shifted our focus towards community-first initiatives, providing essential supplies to families in need during this crisis," he continued passionately, referencing the response to the shortages that had initially sent him spiraling into doubt. "We proved that we could thrive without sacrificing our values." As Tim continued speaking, he caught sight of Jim sitting in the back row. A small sense of apprehension tugged at him. After all, their earlier discussions had been tense. Yet, when he spoke about the positive impact of embracing vulnerability within the workplace, and how Jim had ultimately championed the new approach, Jim nodded in agreement. The tension dissipated, replaced by a collective excitement. The audience responded with applause, but beyond the noise, Tim felt a wave of relief washing over him. He had managed to harness the fear that once shackled him, transforming it into resolve. The realization solidified within him. This was his achievement, not just within the company, but within himself. He had conquered traumas that clouded his professional demeanor and enriched his perspective with new learnings and experiences. At the end of his presentation, he unveiled plans for their upcoming initiative, the Community Cornerstone Project, an endeavor meant to engage their employees and families in volunteer opportunities. "This is just the beginning," he proclaimed, adrenaline surging. "Together, we can forge a future where we thrive, not on profits, but on our ability to nurture others." The applause was thunderous, a reaffirmation that people were inspired not just by his words, but by the authenticity he now represented. Tim smiled, taking it all in. This moment was not just professional success, it was the culmination of personal growth, a defining moment where fear had been exercised and replaced by a solid optimism for the future. Tim stepped down from the stage, the spotlight shifting and fading behind him. There was a sense of clarity within. The solitude of his mansion no longer bore the heavy weight it once did. When he met Emma and Jake after the presentation, he felt their excitement, eagerness to connect again, and even their pride for the journey he had undertaken. Later that evening, as he sat quietly reflecting on the day, a sense of profound satisfaction washed over him. He had done more than merely shift business strategy. In confronting his fears head-on and nurturing the bonds that had frayed, he had rebuilt his identity as a leader, father, and human being. He picked up his phone, scrolling through the notifications of praises and encouraging comments. A sense of belonging had fully returned. This was the legacy he chose.
Embrace moving forward. A legacy built not merely around wealth, but resilience. A mission to encourage sincerity, connection, and ultimately growth within him and the community around him. As he reflected on the journey that lay ahead, Tim knew one immutable truth resonated more than any other. True success arises from the willingness to embrace vulnerability, nourishing the human spirit, and transforming oneself into a vessel of positive impact. Now, will you take this moment to embrace your own journey? You need to subscribe now to join us in celebrating personal transformations like Tim's and witness the next inspiring story. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and ensure that these incredible journeys keep coming. Comment your reactions and theories about Tim's evolution, and don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who must see how embracing vulnerability can lead to success. The time for meaningful change is now. Let's create connections that matter.